when it comes in matters of violence, we are so often put into doubt that we actually doubt ourselves. And this does not come just from the closest circles, but especially from the system. And that's the emergency that we want to address here. And that's why we have Marissa over, who herself is an activist in this matter, has herself had some experiences in this, and will tell us her story, what it is when a victim of domestic violence decides to try to get justice and how costly that can become. So I will leave you to Marissa, and thank you very much again for being here.
I am very nervous. It's my first presentation, so I hope you all bear with me. I want to first take this opportunity to thank the people from De Link, Anna Martins, Lynn, Nathalie Oberweis, for giving me this opportunity. And I also want to thank everybody that's present and who's interested in this subject. Victims, normally they share their story to hopefully inspire other victims to speak out against the abuse and to seek help. I want to be this example of how to become a survivor of domestic violence, an example young girls and women can follow. But I would be deceiving them and I would be encouraging them to speak out. And by encouraging them to speak out, I might put them in more danger than they already are. Even as a social worker, my reflex is not to call the police or authorities or the social services anymore, because what can they do in cases of domestic violence? So I won't be encouraging victims of domestic violence in Luxembourg to seek help anymore. But what I can do is, I can be a voice for them right now, I can be a voice for the voiceless victims, and speak up for all in the hope that the government takes the necessary drastic measures to turn this social and systemic problem of domestic violence around. So domestic violence is a gender problem. And I'm going to just show you with the numbers from the report that was done by the ministries here in Luxembourg. And rapport, yeah. So this is the report of the comité de coopération entre les professionnels dans le domaine de la lutte contre la violence in Luxembourg, and they bring out reports every year, and this one is the last report which they brought out now in June 2022. And if you look on the third page, the second or third page. Yeah. Yeah. So, quelques chiffres clés pour 2022. So, if we look, the police in 2022 had 983 interventions, and only 246 authors of domestic violence or abusers were finally expulsed, meaning that we have in Luxembourg the law from 2003, where when the police comes to a domestic dispute, they have the possibility to inform the prosecutor, and the prosecutor can ask for an expulsion, meaning that the author is put out of the home for 15 days. So we see that 983, that's about 2 cases, 2 interventions of the police per day in cases of domestic violence, and maybe every 2-3 days there's an expulsion. So we see there already that there's a big problem that prosecutors are not, how should I say, taking their responsibility to apply this law to protect the victims. We can see from the second number that the prosecutor, the parquet, the prosecutor's office, they have had 1,489 files of domestic violence last year. The SAFT is the services that assist the victims of domestic violence. And so you can see from the 246 expulsions, so the SAFT actually always contacts the victims in case of an expulsion. So from their 246 cases, they had 3,292 interventions. And then when we look at Service Richterhuis, which is a service that takes in charge the authors of domestic violence, from the 246 expulsions, you can see the 246 files which were expulsions. They have 246 expulsions and they have 215 files which come not via the expulsions, so they have a total of 461, but they don't even have 2,000 consultations. Well, for example, they don't have as many interventions as, for example, the SAFT. So we can see that not much is going on the side of the author. And we can also see that why I say it's a gender problem is that 90% of the authors are male and only 10% are feminine. So as I said before, I'm a social worker and I have studied the problem of the gender violence, which I have written in a book. Unfortunately, I forgot to bring in the book. And after I had finished my book, I fell into a situation myself where I met a man who was very charismatic, very charming, and yes, after 12 police complaints, more than 12 police interventions, 12 doctor's reports, 6 sick leave certificates, 2 warnings from the prosecutor that my ex-husband got in December 2017 and November 2019, 2 expulsions, and my ex-husband was still running around free till last year, May 2022. And up to that time I had spent 18,000 euros on lawyers' fees. And with those 18,000 euros in lawyers' fees, I still did not have the interdiction d'approcher, meaning that he was allowed to, if he comes out of prison, he's allowed to come to my house. I do not have the restraining order. So I was supposed to be informed by the prosecutor when they let my ex-husband out. And 2 weeks ago, I was in Kirchberg, Auchan, and I thought I saw someone who looked like my ex-husband. And in shock, my first reaction was to turn around and try and discreetly walk away. And the next day, I did find out that it was my ex-husband and that I had not been informed. And I also find out that he works in the street just beside me. So, yes, and I have been busy then since the past 2 weeks trying to get a restraining order, which is not going to be as easy as I thought, even with all the proof that is there. There's no immediate danger, and on top of that I've paid another 7,000 euros in lawyers' fees, so I'm now at 25,000 euros in lawyers' fees, and I am an exception because I know other victims that have paid over 200,000 euros in lawyers' fees. I know victims that have had their court case where the author was prosecuted in 2014 and they're still paying their lawyers' fees today. So that's my story. I have a few recommendations that I have already passed on to the ministry, but unfortunately it's always, we cannot do anything. We cannot do anything. Luxembourg has signed the Convention of Istanbul, which is to prevent violence against women. But I'll put it this way, the Istanbul Convention speaks of secondary victimization, and my objective is trying to set something up so that we prevent the secondary victimization for victims. And I think the cost of justice, which is the lawyers' fees, I think that is one of the secondary victimizations, and I will speak about that a little bit further on. I have 4 recommendations that I would have for the government. I think where we need to all focus on as a society and as a government is to focus on recognizing what is psychological violence, because every physical violence is preceded by psychological violence, and physical violence is actually only possible. No, I'm not saying it's possible, but let me put it this way: the victim stays in a situation where there's physical violence going on because of the psychological violence that was happening before that. And then we have the economical abuse, which also happens in situations of domestic violence, and that here in Luxembourg is not enough focused on. So in regards to psychological violence, is the stereotype that we still hold about victims of domestic violence, and I will say that I am guilty as much as probably the rest, because even I am still ashamed, embarrassed to talk about what has happened to me as a victim, even though I did not do anything. It is my ex-husband whose behavior that is unacceptable, but somehow I feel embarrassed, I feel ashamed, I feel humiliated, and the system reinforces this humiliation, which makes it very difficult for victims of domestic violence to speak, and it actually helps to silence the victims as a tactic, strategy that the abuser uses, trying to silence his victims. So we have the stereotype of the hysterical woman, the crazy woman who provokes the poor man. And it made me think of the movie Fatal Attraction from back in the days, where women are portrayed as the one who's trying to get revenge, and really ideas from the Middle Ages, I think. And these ideas that we have of women does not really give victims of domestic abuse any chance to get the proper help, because they are not seen as victims, but rather as the perpetrators. These past few years, I can give one example, a lot has been talked about mutual violence, or the way here in Luxembourg we speak about violence réciproque, whilst I would prefer to speak about self-defense. There's also another term which is often used in relation to narcissistic abuse, which is reactive abuse, but then again we have the term abuse. I do not like that term, that it's actually victim shaming, and it's deflecting from where the problem is, and that's why I prefer the term of self-defense. Violence réciproque or mutual violence is also very dangerous because it's actually a term that is used for racialized women, meaning women that are not white, because there's this stereotype that African women, Latino women, they have this hot temper or hot temperament, which apparently non-white, or which apparently white women do not have. So again, this idea that certain women are hot-tempered and have this hot temperament makes it that these women do not get the necessary help when police come or when they're in court in front of the judges or prosecutors. I want to say one other thing about this mutual violence, why I do not believe in mutual violence, especially when it comes to physical and to sexual violence. In combative sports, men and women are categorized under weight and size. Right now there's this discussion in the sports that women do not want to compete with trans men, which just seems quite fair, since biology has taught us for centuries that men and women are different biologically. Men biologically and by nature are physically more stronger than a woman. So that's why I have a problem with mutual violence, and I prefer to speak about self-defense. There is many examples of psychological violence that the perpetrators do, the abusers of violence, and that the system, the government, the courts, the lawyers and police continue, which is victim shaming, minimizing the abuse, like saying, oh, don't be so sensitive, mobbing, deflecting, which is trying to put the attention away from the behavior of the author and blame the victim. People tell the victim, don't pay attention to it, just let it be, just leave it. Trying to deflect and again minimize the violence. Gaslighting, cheating, betrayal, lying, all these are psychological violence. And betrayal is also something, what's it called, gaslighting is also something that the governments unfortunately they do to, I don't know why the governments have this what's it called, but I think we will come to that later on, because I think that capitalism plays a big role in that. And then we have the economic violence. And the economic violence also that is continued by the state with the lawyer fees, the long procedures that take years, and of course that cost again, and that bring again more lawyer fees. Yes, if you, and I could show the formulaire of the assistance judiciaire. So in Luxembourg, there is possibility to have free legal assistance and aid, but mostly the victims do not fulfill the conditions for this free legal aid, because if you work and if you earn above the minimum salary, you do not have rights to this legal aid. However, you would have to, I think, scroll down a little bit. I think it's on the last page, if I'm not mistaken. On the second page. Yes. So yeah, not before. One more. So you can see détenu. détenus, réfugiés mineurs, meaning that people who have been prosecuted, who are in prison, they have the right to free legal aid, refugees and minors. I think the two last ones, we can agree that's no question, no doubt about that. But if they put détenus, if they put people who have been prosecuted, people who are in prison, if they have the right for this free legal aid, my question is, how come there's not victims of violence or victims of domestic violence? And this is one document which just shows me that our government has it completely wrong, and I'm shocked. I have no words for it, and I hope we will be able to change this very soon. And then I come to my third point, that is systemic and structural violence like this, that prisoners, they have a right to free legal aid, but not the victims. Luxembourg lacks holding abusers accountable. Why don't the courts condemn the abusers to pay for the lawyer fees of the victims, especially since 50% of the perpetrators here in Luxembourg are repeat offenders, which is very high, 50%. So we have an article 240 from the Nouveau Code Procédure. So it's one of the articles in the legislation of Luxembourg that allows one party to ask for the other party to pay for the lawyer fees. And Monday I had my court case to ask for the restraining order, where I asked the judge if she could grant me this article, and I was just ridiculized. So, yes, again, I think to myself, the problem is definitely structural, and why would a judge not grant me that favor or grant a victim this favor? And so we see that the will is not even there. There's a law, but the will is not there. So that means also that when a victim asks for this article to be applied, not all lawyers grant it. Among these structural and systemic violence is also the long procedures with no end or guaranteed result. The way my ex-husband was put into prison was actually not because of the lawyers or the prosecutors or whatsoever, but I had to devise some kind of strategy, and I put my life in danger, and that's how finally he did get caught, and he was put in prison, but he was left out. He was also condemned to 2 years in prison. He was supposed to stay 2 years, but he got out for good behavior after 8 months. So all this, of course, this pushes victims to post-traumatic stress disorders, and a lot of victims that I have met feel very suicidal because of all of this, because of the powerlessness in the situation and the feeling of abandonment. Then I wanted to show you all a last slide. If Anna doesn't mind just putting the last slide. Le prix de la justice. And page number 17. So we can say at the beginning of the year, the professionals were invited by Taina Boffating and the Ministry of Justice and the Ministry of sécurité intérieure, interior security, to 20 years of legislation on domestic violence, combat that is not terminated, that hasn't finished yet. And I must say the ministers were very, very open, and they said if any of the victims have any problems, we could always contact them. But also, just so it's known, unfortunately, when you contact them, you hear the victim, we cannot do anything, we cannot do anything. So we come to this decisions that victims have, and during this conference there was a woman, Madame Bettina Rieder, who gave a presentation on authors of domestic violence, and this is one of the diagrams that she showed, and I found it very interesting, and I did recognize myself completely in this, and I think many victims of domestic violence, they will recognize this. There's only two possibilities. There's the possibility you stay in your relationship and you know that there's going to be violence. Or you leave and then you have the whole list of insecurities that you are confronted with. And I think that Mrs. Bettina Rieder, I do not know if you guys understand German, if there's anybody wants me to translate what is written there, but the second choice definitely needs to put, there needs to be put the secondary victimization, meaning the lawyer fees, the long procedures, judges that have no idea what they're doing. I'll give you another example. The Istanbul Convention says that no mediation should be done between a victim and an author of violence in the case of divorce. And in Luxembourg, a lot of judges, they order a mediation for the victims and the authors of domestic abuse, which very often is a torture for the victims because of the mind manipulation that the author playing very kind, charismatic, charming image that he has to portray outside, and yes, very often mediation is not advised in cases of domestic violence, but it's still being ordered by the courts. So, and then my last suggestion is, I personally do not consider myself a feminist. I don't think also that feminism is the solution. And when I speak of feminism, I'm sorry that I say, but when I speak of feminism, I think especially of white feminism. White feminism that encourages classism and colonialism and separation. So, my book, whilst writing my book and whilst doing the research of my book, I found out that sexism and white feminism are actually tools that were initially used to break up the black families. So it's a racist tool. It's a divide and conquer strategy, because the family is the cornerstone of a society. So if you break the family, you break the society. So it was used in the 60s in the civil rights movement to break the civil rights movement, and it is being used still till today because it benefits capitalism. And when we strip everything away and analyze, for example, Darwin's theory from a very primitive standpoint, because he says that, or his analysis was of primitive people. So if we look at primitive people that live with nature, I would say, is that woman, there's certain things we cannot deny. Woman gives life. I know there's a debate amongst the LGBTQ+, but biologically speaking, woman gives life. And biologically speaking, it has always been like this, that man protects this life. He protects the life of the one that gives life, and also he protects Mother Earth. Because Mother Earth, we need Mother Earth. Without Mother Earth, we cannot survive. So Mother Earth is needed to sustain life. We belong to Mother Earth. It's like some civilizations they believe in, and Mother Earth does not belong to us, because when we die, Mother Earth is still here and not us. So my solution is to go back to the indigenous way of our ancestors that lived in harmony with nature. We need inclusion, and with that I also mean we cannot exclude men. Feminism, the way it is today, hasn't worked, in my opinion, but that's just my opinion. And I think when it comes to domestic violence or gender violence against women, we need men to fight beside us and to stand up for the women and to go back to protecting women from other men. And from those, if we really want to eradicate this problem, from those that are keeping capitalism alive, because capitalism is the big problem. Capitalism thrives on divide and conquer, and what we need to do is unite. So I think having women's groups is really good. It helps as women to be able, sisterhood. But on the other side, on the other hand, I think we also need to start creating brotherhoods where brothers stand up against violence. And I'm not just talking about physical violence, but it's also, and I think there's in certain countries, there are certain projects where men are asked to intervene when they see a woman being harassed on the train, on the bus, in the club, on a terrace or wherever, in a public open space. And I think that's also what we need to be focusing on, is how to get the men to help us and to confront these other men. Fathers, uncles, brothers, cousins, who are all against domestic violence, want to be there to protect the women, but because the way society has formed itself these past years, men also find it very difficult to act because they do not know, they don't want to be called a macho, they don't want to be, so I understand that it's very difficult for men, but I do think that that is the solution to this problem. I think that also that if more heterosexual men would find out that prisoners have the right to this free legal aid, but not victims of domestic violence, I would think that there would be more revolting and maybe things would change a bit faster. So that's my presentation. Thank you for listening and thank you for your time. Any questions?
So thank you so much. This was very enriching, and also thank you for opening up about your personal case. It's like you said, it's not the right thing to encourage victims to talk because that comes with consequences, and you've lived some of them. But the fact that you're doing it is huge, and it's very important. And I also thumbs up for having the courage to come to a Feminist Wednesday and say, I don't believe in feminism. I have to say that this is really, and we agree with you, white feminism is not what we should go for. This is absolutely not the way to go. But all in all, thank you for this. I think that we all got some really crucial infos in here, and that we want to work on these subjects. In this case, at the GT Feminist, the feminist working group from the LA, anyone that wants to participate can just... Even for not feminists, like...
Not considering yourself feminist.
Exactly. It's just, we struggle finding a way to describe feminism by now, but what we mean is like, tackle this gender violence, tackle this hardwired systemic violence that we have and that people not normalize this anymore. And when we know that there is someone around us going through that, as you see, it's hard to rely on the system, but at least like give these opportunities, like to Marissa, or just stay along, stay next to your friend, don't leave them alone. This is tough. And now we'll have some drinks and let's party.
If anybody wants to report, just let me know. I can send it to them gladly.